Have you ever found yourself maybe in a situation where someone just flat out told you you can't sing?
Yeah, or maybe that you have no rhythm. It happens all the time.
Right. Or perhaps you've just felt this kind of subtle, nagging disconnect from your own body's natural movements. Like something fundamental, something innate was just off.
Hmm.
Well, today we're diving deep into exactly that feeling. We're looking at the really profound insights of Terrence Hughes from his upcoming book, The Invisible Injury.
Yeah, and our mission today is to really unpack Hughes's argument. It's powerful. He's saying rhythm is way more than just music.
More than music. How so?
Well, he sees it as a fundamental organizing principle. It's absolutely vital, he says, for human performance, for rehabilitation, and just our overall health. It affects everything.
Everything from how we heal to how we move, how we connect.
Exactly. It underpins all of that.
And that's where it gets really interesting, right? Because he sees rhythm as this like huge untapped resource. He even calls it a missing discipline.
A missing discipline, yeah. And he's quite clear that this isn't some accident. It's not like we just naturally lost it. He argues it's been systematically, culturally suppressed.
Okay, so we need to unpack that. Why has something so apparently innate become so misunderstood?
Yeah.
And, often so badly taught?
Right. And the impact of this invisible injury, as he calls it, is huge. It affects our lives, our joy, even our physical well-being in ways we probably don't even realize.
So let's start there. What exactly did we lose, according to Hughes?
Well, Hughes really emphasizes how damaging this disconnection is. I mean, he uses incredibly strong terms.
Like what?
Things like musical apartheid and theft of birthright.
Wow. Those are intense. Is he just being provocative?
I don't think it's just for effect. He backs it up. He points to studies on infants. They consistently show that every single human is born with this innate rhythmic capacity. We're literally hardwired for it.
Hardwired from day one. Okay.
And then think historically. He points out that until, Western industrialization really took hold, pretty much every human culture was deeply musical, deeply connected to rhythm and movement. It was just part of life.
So when we tell a kid, oh, you can't sing, or you're a terrible dancer.
Hughes says we're literally stealing their evolutionary heritage. We're cutting them off from something fundamental, something that used to be universal.
And it's not just random comments, is it? He says it's systematic.
Absolutely. The whole idea of being good enough or, say, in tune, often that's judged by these very specific kind of arbitrary Western standards.
What do you mean by arbitrary?
Well, like privileging certain scales or perfect pitch. Lots of other musical traditions use microtones or blue notes that might sound off to us, but they're perfectly correct within their own system.
Ah, okay. So our definition of good is culturally specific.
Right. And this narrow view creates this sort of gatekeeping around who's gifted or talented. And that ends up excluding most people from something that should really be a universal human thing.
That leads into some of his even stronger language, doesn't it?
It does. He doesn't mince words. He calls this separation from our own voice, our own movement. He calls it spiritual violence, even psychological abuse.
That's incredibly strong. Spiritual violence.
Yeah, because he argues when you tell someone they can't express themselves through their natural voice or movement, you're not just stifling a bit of creativity, you're actually wounding their sense of self, their connection to community, really deeply.
And in extreme cases.
He argues it can contribute to cultural genocide, basically discrediting and dismantling these core parts of human identity and cultural knowledge that are passed down through embodied practices, not just books.
Wow. Okay, and this isn't just a cultural idea for him, right? You mentioned biology earlier.
Exactly. He brings in research like Stephen Mithen's singing Neanderthals idea.
Singing Neanderthals. Okay, tell me more.
Well, the thesis is basically that music isn't just some cultural add-on we invented later. It's fundamental. It's encoded in our genome. Our ancestors were likely singing and moving, way before complex language developed.
So we didn't just evolve to talk, but to sing and move together integrally.
Precisely. Mithen suggests this early communication system he calls HMMMM.
What's that stand for?
It's holistic, multimodal, mimetic, musical, and manipulative.
Okay, break that down.
It means communication that blended everything: sound, movement, gesture, rhythm, emotion, group bonding all at once.
Yeah.
It was our original relationship with rhythm, fully embodied, fully integrated.
That paints quite a picture. So we evolved as these integrated music movement beings, and yet our modern world systematically pulls those things apart. It almost feels like we're fighting our own nature.
It does. And, neuroscience backs this up, too. Neuroplasticity shows the brain wants to connect music and physical activity. It thrives on it.
Which makes the question even more pressing. How did we build a world that seems designed to disconnect us? What were the forces, historically, that Hughes points to?
Right. He calls it the architecture of disconnection. And a really stark example he uses is the historical suppression of embodied worship.
Okay, like what?
Think about when Christian missionaries went to African communities. The Africans naturally took European hymns and just infused them with their own rhythms, their vocal styles, made them incredibly vibrant and embodied.
And that wasn't always welcomed, I imagine.
Not at all. Colonial authorities often feared that power, that African-infused way of worship. It led to enslaved Africans having to worship in secret, singing, chanting, dancing, reaching ecstatic state just to hold on to their identity through rhythm.
That's intense. And you mentioned architecture.
Yes, the pews. It's fascinating. Pews in churches are actually pretty recent, historically speaking. Mostly came in with the Protestant Reformation. For about 1,400 years, Christian worshipers mostly stood or knelt or moved. Pews literally fix you in place. They make worship passive, something you watch the priest do, rather than something you participate in bodily.
So the pews themselves teach passivity. That's architectural psychology, shaping behavior through design.
Exactly. And it ties into other things like the banning of drums and West African instruments in colonial America. People had to rely on hand claps, foot stomps.
Finding rhythm however they could.
Right. And even earlier, you had church leaders like Tertullian and St. Augustine actively arguing against dance and worship. They saw it as pagan, lustful, something to be stamped out.
So by the early 1600s, Christian dance in Europe was largely gone.
Pretty much. But then Hughes points out how enslaved Africans, in this act of incredible resilience, basically put the dance back into Christianity.
Through traditions like shouting.
Exactly. Fast gospel music, rapid, sometimes frenzied dancing, call and response, reclaiming that embodied spirituality.
Even then, there was resistance.
Oh, yeah. Rules like your feet couldn't cross during the shouts, because that looked too much like African dancing. Drums stayed forbidden if they were linked to potential uprisings.
So the takeaway is?
Institutions consistently saw the subversive power of rhythm and movement, and they made systematic efforts to control it, often brutally.
That's a really powerful historical thread. And does Hughes see that pattern continuing today?
Absolutely. He talks about modern compartmentalization and academic devaluation.
Meaning?
Our education system just systematically separates music and movement. Think about it. Dance is often shunted off, separate from PE, rarely integrated into, say, history or science, even though it could be.
Right. And we reward sitting still, focusing on the cognitive, even though we just said that goes against our integrated nature.
Exactly. Head over body. And Hughes asks, why do academic institutions often reinforce this?
What's his answer?
He points to an academic hierarchy. Institutions tend to diminish traditions that embody knowledge. Think of capoeira or Indian classical music or flamenco percussion.
How do they diminish them?
By reducing them, turning them into objects of study, stripping away the spiritual, the communal, the lived experience, making them academic subjects instead of living practices.
He calls that epistemological violence, right?
Yes. Because these traditions often operate on different timescales, different ways of knowing embodied wisdom, not just intellectual facts. And that fundamentally challenges the standard academic framework, which prioritizes the abstract, the decontextualized.
It's a clash of how we even understand what knowledge is.
Precisely.
And all this disconnection, Hughes argues, leads to a kind of modern tragedy, particularly in sports.
Yeah, the rhythmically disconnected athlete. It's deeply ironic. People dedicate their lives to physical excellence, but they're often missing this core principle of rhythm.
Why is that? Why do coaches often miss this?
Because the system they came up through likely severed movement from music. It prioritized mechanics, efficiency metrics, and reduced rhythm to just, an external metronome beat, if anything. It made athletics serious, scientific, maybe squeezed out the joy, the musicality.
So it's not just about whether they use music, but how. You mentioned Hughes distinguishes between exercise to music and movement in and with music.
Yes, this is absolutely crucial.
Let's explain that difference.
Okay, exercise to music, that's most gyms, right? Music is background, maybe a motivator. The body follows set patterns. Think aerobics or running with a playlist dictating the pace. Music's an accessory.
Got it. And the other one?
Movement in and with music. That's totally different.
Yeah.
Music becomes an internal organizing force. Movement arises from rhythmic awareness. The body isn't just following, it's conversing with the rhythm, flowing, adapting, expressing.
And that's what's missing in most modern training.
Almost entirely, he argues. Modern training misses rhythm as the organizer for timing, coordination, endurance, power, everything.
Leading to athletes who might be technically great, efficient, but maybe not. Expressive, they perform, but they don't quite flow.
Exactly. They lack that internal adaptive rhythm that can elevate everything. And it's such a contrast to older traditions.
Like what?
Well, think African warriors training to drums, gaining focus and stamina from those trance-like states. Or capoeira, the efficiency, the power, the endurance, all comes through the rhythm, through the jinga, that constant flow.
The foundational movement, right?
Yeah. Or even Asian martial arts, where kata were originally performed to internal rhythms, more like dynamic meditation than just executing moves.
And without this integrated approach, Hughes calls it
A criminal waste of human potential. That's his phrase.
meaning untapped efficiency, more injuries, shorter careers.
And just a loss of joy in movement itself. It's a tragedy we've strayed so far.
But then there's a twist. Hughes suggests that injury itself can sometimes teach us.
Yes, this is maybe one of the most profound parts of his argument. Injury often becomes the unexpected teacher that forces us back into a rhythmic relationship with our bodies.
How does that happen?
Well, when you're injured, the purely mechanical approach often just stops working. You can't just push through. You're forced to listen
Listen to what?
to your internal rhythms. The rhythm of pain, its ebbs and flows, your body's healing capacity, which has its own timing. Movement shifts from being automatic to being a conscious conversation.
So the injury is like a jolt, a reset button.
Kind of. It forces you to develop what he calls rhythmic intelligence. Not just a schedule, but awareness of daily rhythms, micro-rhythms within movement, even seasonal or emotional rhythms affecting your body. You have to be present.
And you start to learn what indigenous cultures maybe always knew.
Exactly. That the body has its own intelligence, that healing follows natural time frames, that fighting against those rhythms just creates more suffering.
It's deeply ironic, isn't it, that we often only learn this embodied wisdom through crisis.
It really is. Injury becomes, for many people, their first real teacher of rhythmic relationships since childhood. Suddenly, having limited capacity reveals everything that was missing when movement felt unlimited but was unconscious.
The slowdown forces a deeper awareness.
Right. Post-injury, you often discover your body isn't a machine, it's a partner. You learn rhythm as medicine, breath rhythms for pain, walking rhythms for rehab, sleep rhythms for healing. You see how purely mechanical movement really was.
So injury can be the first taste of true embodiment, rhythmic intelligence, sustainable practice.
For many, yes. And that just highlights how disconnected our mainstream movement culture has become.
Okay, so if that's the problem, this deep disconnection, what does Hughes propose as a way forward?
He developed something called the SAMBA protocol.
SAMBA, like the dance.
Well, it's an acronym. SAMBA, specificity, action learning, movement and rhythm, behavioral cognitive integration, and applied precision.
Okay, what's the core idea?
It's a shift. Moving away from just building isolated bits, more strengths here, more speed there, towards developing integrated movement intelligence.
Yeah.
Moving wisely, not just forcefully.
And how does it do that? It sounds like it tries to bring everything back together.
It does. It blends ancient wisdom, like the rhythmic principles we've discussed, with modern science. It focuses on cultural bridge building, circular thinking like his movement weir idea, organizing development through natural cycles, is trying to reverse that compartmentalization.
And does it work? What's the impact?
The results seem pretty impressive. Studies show things like a 68% drop in non-contact injuries.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, presumably helping athletes move with their body's rhythms, not against them. But also better performance, cognitive benefits, fostering movement intelligence that lasts a lifetime, and importantly, building community through shared practice.
So the bigger vision is?
To transform movement training from just mechanical exercise into intelligent education, creating movers who are resilient, adaptive, creative, and contributing to what he hopes will be a cultural renaissance of human movement wisdom.
A renaissance. That sounds ambitious, but also necessary, given what you've described.
Absolutely, when you think about the scale of the crime, as he puts it.
Right, millions potentially cut off from their birthright joy, health, creativity, because someone convinced them they can't sing or can't dance.
Exactly. And he argues the system kind of perpetuates this scarcity. It benefits institutions.
How so?
Well, if everyone felt naturally capable, who needs expensive specialized training just to access basic movement or musicality? If it's inclusive, you can't easily gatekeep expertise or build markets around fixing a supposed deficit. It maintains hierarchies.
Whereas the alternative,
Yep.
Community-based, embodied, inclusive approaches.
Could unlock so much potential, imagine. Flourishing cultural expression, better health outcomes, stronger social bonds through shared rhythm. It points towards a much more, well, harmonious society.
So the real crime, in Hughes's view, isn't just the exclusion.
It's convincing people they have no capacity in the first place, when actually they have immense untapped potential just waiting. His work is really about epistemological liberation.
Freeing us from those limiting beliefs about ourselves.
Exactly. Think about how many of us just stopped trying to sing or dance or move freely because we bought into the idea we weren't good enough, when that idea itself was the barrier, robbing us of something fundamental.
So, wrapping up our deep dive today, we've journeyed through Terence Hughes's ideas from the invisible injury. We've touched on our evolutionary roots, the historical forces of suppression, the modern disconnect, and even how injury can paradoxically wake us up.
Yeah, and the core message seems really clear. This diminished relationship we often have with rhythm, it's not inevitable. It's a cultural wound, an invisible injury that impacts our performance, our health, our simple joy.
But the potential, that innate capacity for rhythmic intelligence, it's still there, inside each of us.
Waiting to be rediscovered.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. How might your own life, your work, your relationships, your sense of well-being, how might it shift if you started consciously listening to and moving with your body's innate rhythms instead of maybe ignoring them or fighting against them?
What invisible injury might you begin to heal? What possibilities could open up just by rediscovering something you were actually born with?